Good afternoon, or I guess it's good morning still, thankfully. One second. I must adjust. It's been a little bit of a weird morning here. If I might have to go really quick if I receive a call. It might pause the live. I don't know how they'll do it because I'll probably just take the call just because I've got some stuff going on. So if I suddenly disappear, that would be why. If that happens, I will restart the live again in a couple. But I just have some situations going on in my life that sometimes can really affect it, and I'm waiting for a phone call on that. I changed up our thought process. Hello, Gordon. I changed up our thought process a little bit today. We can still absolutely discuss some of the other things that we've been discussing over the last couple of days, if there are still questions on some of that stuff. But I just changed it up so we have a little bit of new stuff going on, just so that it keeps it kind of interesting for me and everybody else along their way. I love paleoanthropology, and it is one of my focuses, but I also have a focus of women and gender in pre-Christian societies. So we can touch on that a little bit, specifically women at war and leadership in pre-Christian societies. And then medicine and science are always huge to me, so we can absolutely touch on all of these little things behind me, and I just thought we'd open it a little bit. Occipital buns. Certain hominin species have occipital buns. They're a bump at the back of the friend. Hello, friend. We bred in the Neanderthal, not out. But other than, the presence of occipital buns, I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you talking about like I don't know of any like different intelligence associated with occipital buns or anything like that. But I do know some of the species that they're on, like Neanderthal. That's interesting. I've never known of a hominin to have, or a Homo sapien to have an occipital bun. I would be interested to see your like skull X-rays. If you have like skull X-rays, that's like kind of cool. So again, as we hit a high number of people, I have some shit going on today. So if I have to drop out, I'm gonna have to go. I only really started up the live because I had like set up the live event. But if I have to drop out, I'll go, and then I'll be back as soon as I'm done. I've got a phone call that's coming in that I'm waiting on, so I might have to drop, and then I'll come back probably within like 20 minutes. Because it's an important phone call, I'll probably just take the phone call if it comes in. It can be a little bit weird on my phone, so just so you guys know, if I disappear, that's why. I will come back, but my life likes to blow up occasionally. Yes, Darius. Do you have a specific question, love? Because everybody except for 2 spaces in Africa have Neanderthal DNA, and the 2 spaces within Africa that do not have Neanderthal DNA actually have 3 ghost species in their DNA. The ghost species is a species that we see in DNA, but we haven't found it in the fossil record yet. So I think sometimes the 23andMe and I think that those genes are accurate to some extent, but my genes say I have dark skin, and well, it's not ultra light, it's also not dark, so it can be, So we know that biologically Homo sapien has 3 genders or 3 sexes. It has 3 biological sexes. There is female, male, and intersex biologically, but that's biologically. So biologically for sex in other Homo species, we see the same thing, right? Yes, proudly. And since biologically species have 3 sexes, gendering within Neanderthal or other Homo species, we're not exactly sure exactly how gender worked, but what we see is that, like with Neanderthals, as we're DNA testing the Neanderthal bodies that we have, that Neanderthals might have been opposite as dimorphically with dimorphical sex, like their women may have been bigger than their men, and that gender roles would have probably played out a little bit differently within those people. So, hello, Sleepy. So with that, I don't I don't have people come live with me. Sorry. With that, we understand that gender in other Homo species is probably not what we think of gender. We also understand that gender in Homo sapiens is not what we thought of as gender, what we think of as gender. Like this, our idea of gender is recent. It's not, something we've had. I will absolutely touch a little bit more on the ghost species. So we know of 5 ghost species currently. The 5 ghost species that we know of, we don't have names because we don't have fossils of them. And the 5 ghost species that we know of, 3 are in the 2 spaces in Africa that I mentioned that do not have Neanderthal DNA. 1 has been found recently within Neanderthal and Denisovian DNA, and it's not something we found within Homo sapien DNA, but within Neanderthal and Denisovian DNA. And 1 ghost species is here on Turtle Island. Again, ghost species are other species that we see in the fingerprint of the DNA, like in the DNA fingerprint, but we do not see see them in the fossilized record. Again, I'm having a hard morning. I had some stuff happen, and so I'm awaiting a phone call. And when the phone call comes in, I'll disappear. I'll come back after it's done. So my brain is a little bit dysfunctional this morning as well because I've been having panic attacks all morning long. So my brain is a little bit on slow mode. So if my words go off, that's why. We will never really find a hermaphrodite probably within Neanderthal because hermaphrodite is a presence of both genitals, right? That's not intersexed. Intersexed is, either having the organs from both biological sexes or having no sex organs. And it's also not just about the organs, it's also about the DNA and stuff. So we probably won't find hermaphroditic, any evidence of actual hermaphrodites, but we might find intersex within Neanderthal DNA as we're moving along. Not sure, but we're not sure. Oh, I don't even, thank you, Mia. I don't know anything about, blood types at all, sorry. Blood types just aren't my thing. I barely know my blood type. Non-binary as in, they don't view gender as we view gender. So most, including us, most species don't do gender the way we do gender currently. Within Homo sapiens, we know that most societies had 3 genders, and several had 5 genders, and that biologically there are 3 sexes. So with that, it gives us the ability to understand that our view currently of gender is not, the view of gender. And even our view of gender roles are only recent. Like, we think of heels and makeup and velvet and lace and pink as being feminine, but they are all, in fact, first masculine. All of those things first came in male roles and for males' use. So with that, we see I don't have patience this morning, sorry. With that, we see that our understanding of gender roles is not something that we've understand as general roles. Sorry, gender roles. over the course of history. It's pretty recent. And that our understanding of gender as being binary or as there being two genders is very recent as well. So within pre-Christian societies, we find that many had three genders, and that some today still have five genders. Unfortunately, with Neanderthals, and Neanderthals are who we know the most about. With Neanderthals, even then, we really can't tell exactly what they were doing. Like, I mean, we can tell what they were doing, but like who had what roles and things like that becomes a little bit more difficult when just looking at the skeletons and at tools. There's not a lot of belongings buried in Neanderthals' graves. In fact, burial was a little bit of a later thing with Neanderthal and a more recent thing with us. Burials really only go about like 50,000 years old, I think. And so we're not seeing a lot of like grave goods and stuff like that. And so with things like that, it's a little harder to tell. But if we look within pre-Christian societies that are later, like within the last 5,000 years, let's say, we can even go a little bit further back if we want to go to pre-Yahweh. So pre-patriarchy would be further back than that. And pre-patriarchy, we see it an entirely different thing as well. But throughout history, up until the last 200 years, the vast majority of societies had women who led, women who were kings, and women who were generals. And that's one of the things that my focuses are on. So I really enjoy looking at the fact that women have been extremely strong and extremely well respected as being strong throughout history, that we were leaders, that we were generals, that we were warriors, right? For me, that becomes a very important nuance to the story of human history, right? And as we're looking further, we're finding more and more information on this as we're stopping the look with bias. And as we're DNA testing, a lot of times in our DNA testing, things that we previously thought were male because they were buried with items of war and we automatically associated that with male, have turned into females. One of these is the Burqa warrior woman grave, BJ581, which is the grave that I study extensively. Another one of these is the Scythian warrior graves that showed high-ranking warriors recently turning out to be all female warriors. Another one of these things is the fact that many Neanderthal bones that we have associated as being male turned out to be female. And like the Amesbury archer, who we have thought this entire time was male, is female. And so when we look at these things, when we start, I welcome opposing views, but I don't welcome ignorance. If you're choosing ignorance, then that's when you're going to get blocked, right? If you want to talk about opposing views, that's fine. If you want to talk about it in a polite manner, I'm talking in a polite manner. I'm doing labor for you, free labor for you. So if you want to talk about it in a polite manner, instead of seeing things like this is all false, if you want to have some facts and some evidence, because I'm bringing facts and some evidence to the table, then you're welcome to have opposing views, right? So bone structure really doesn't tell us as much as we think it does. So on average, female bones are lighter and male bones are heavier. On average, the male pelvis is longer and narrow and the female pelvis is shorter and broader. On average, we see changes in the bones between masculine skeletons and feminine skeletons. Note the word of masculine and feminine, okay? Not necessarily male or female, but those are deemed masculine or feminine. Now, a lot of times when we DNA test those skeletons that we thought based on skeletal structure were masculine, we're finding out that they're feminine. Sometimes we thought based on skeletal structure that they were feminine, and that's why we tested them. Like with BJ581, the Burqa warrior woman, whose bones looked lighter and more gracile when they were studied in 75, and that's why they DNA tested them when the DNA testing advent for ancient remains became better available. So when we talk about average, what we're saying is that, so average is you take 100 numbers and you add them all together and then you divide them by 100. When we're talking about average age, this comes into play because we take all of the ages of 100 people and then we divide that by 100. And if 50 of those people die before the age of 5, which happened frequently throughout history because many children didn't make it out of the initial infant stages. Many children didn't even make it through birth. A lot of them died before 1. Those that lived to 1 might live to 5. If you made it to 20, you were likely to live to 50. If you made it to 50, you would likely make it to 80. Okay, so when we look at average age in history and we're like, well, nobody lived past 50, what it means is that if 50 people died before the age of 1 and 30 people lived to 100, your average age is going to be 50. It doesn't mean that nobody lived to 100. It means that a bunch of children died and that some people live to 100. And so the same thing is a presence with average in bone structure. So average is that most people who are biologically female are going to have lighter bones. But there are quite a few people who are biologically female who have extremely heavier bones or bigger bone structure, or most people who are biologically female might be shorter, but there are still going to be people out there, and we've all seen that 6'7" woman out there. Most people that are biologically female are going to have shorter and broader pelvises for childbirth, but we've all seen women who have very narrow hips, right? And that has to do with their pelvis because they have a taller and narrower pelvis. So, and we've all seen men who have very broad hips, right? So on average, on average, we see that male skeletons are heavier than female skeletons, and male pelvises look this way, and males are taller, right? But that doesn't mean all the time. So a lot of times when we take that knowledge of on average and then we, sorry, hold on. A lot of times if we take that knowledge on average and we realize it's just an average, then when we're looking at the bones and we decide that it's this because that's the average, we find out later with DNA that that's not the average. Biologically intersexed exists. That's what the scientific definition of a third gender would be. Because gender is not necessarily about science. Gender is about the view. But you said gender and not sex. So the scientific gender of, or scientific example of intersex or non-binary would be the biological intersex. Okay. Gideon. Oh, hey. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see if I. Hi.
Hey,
Welcome.
hey, how do you do?
Hey. Pretty good. So Gideon was actually one of the people that found Homo naledi. And so I wanted to let them in to talk a little bit about Homo naledi. If you're new to my lives,
Yes,
Homo naledi is one of the other Homo species. So I'm going to go ahead and open the floor to them about Homo naledi.
thank you very much. Actually, what happened is the discovery came quite by accident because by training, I'm a geologist and I was busy at the time working towards my PhD or completing my PhD on cave geology or cave morphology. So friends and I went into this cave system called the Rising Star System, and they went. Two of my friends, Stephen and Rick, went down a very, very, very tight a crack, basically. They came up again and they reported seeing these human-like bones. I asked them to go down there because I just couldn't fit. It's just too tight. I mean, I'm 6'3" and big built, and I just couldn't get down this crack, much to my frustration. In any case, they zipped down back there and came up, having taken a lot of photos. We then approached Professor Lee Berger, and he immediately recognized it for what it was, a pre-human or early hominid. At that point in time, we thought perhaps it was one individual like Littlefoot. We had no idea how rich this vault was. Up to date, I think we have recovered in excess of 350 individual fossil pieces of the species, making it one of the richest early hominid sites in the world and certainly in the cradle of humankind. There you go.
That's
So that's the
amazing.
basic introduction.
Um, that's amazing. This is a site I've actually wanted to know more on. Really, I didn't find out about it until I was in school. And like I mentioned before,
Okay.
Dr. Chang had been invited to that site because of the smallness of the passage to get to it, but she had
Yes.
chosen not to. And she is who told us about it, but she really had just the basic information, and I just always found it to be really exciting. So we
Yeah.
found cranial vaults. So do we have an idea of appearance of the face with the cranium,
Yes,
like
we
compared
do.
to other Homo?
Yes, we do. In fact, we have now recovered enough pieces to compile a complete skull, and the skull and the face of Homo naledi is shockingly Australopithecine-like.
Oh wow!
Strong prognosis, very, very strong facial prognosis, very strong receding forehead with a surprisingly small brain, still ranging in the vicinity of 500 cc, very, very Australopith-like in morphology. Uh, the shoulders, very Australopith-like. The humerus, radius ulnae, and hands, the finger bones are still strongly curved, indicating arboreal locomotion. However, from the hips down, from the and notably the femurs and the hip bones themselves, the ilium, ischium, etc., strikingly modern, strikingly derived. So this made us wonder as to why this would be the case. Obviously, as you know, you're a paleoanthropologist yourself. That clearly had something to do with a very potent and dominant point mutation that
Yeah.
completely altered the hip morphology of the early hominids, and notably so in Homo naledi. And now we are starting to think that this may well be the success of our story, is that this new hip morphology uh, enabled us to become what I would call uh, endurance bipeds. So we could walk very, 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 very far. And that helped us spreading the genus Homo into previous habitats and niches we
Yeah.
couldn't go before. But from, as I said again, from the hip up, still very, very Australopith-like in morphology and build. But from the hips down, very difficult to tell the difference between Naledi and derived Homo sapiens. Strikingly the same. Literally, if you found the bones in two different sites, you would have said they belonged to two different hominids. That's distinct. So from the L vertebrae up, Australopith. From the L vertebrae down, Homo. Homo, and that's how Lee Berger uh, and uh, Steve Churchill could identify the species as belonging to the genus Homo proper because of the femur, the morphology of the femur, the patella, and then, of course, and notably the feet. They are strikingly modern or derived, in opposition to the hands, which are strikingly Australopith-like. An amazing creature, and yet surprisingly young.
Yeah, what is the aging? Do we have a dating on them?
Yes, the age is surprisingly young. We've got an age between 150 to 230,000 years only. So they were
Ago
contemporary.
or so they're dated to 150 to two. Repeat those
Yeah,
dates. And is that the dating of when they were there in that cave?
yes,
Wow.
absolutely. Which
150.
was an absolute shocking surprise. Because at that time Homo sapiens per se were around, and they would
Yeah.
have certainly shared the landscape with a Homo sapien for sure, for sure.
Well, and
So
come
what
after.
this tells us, mhm. Hi, can you guys still hear me? Okay. Yeah, the dating they have done, as I said, guys, I'm a geologist, so the dating they have done on Naledi indicate that the species per se is very, very young, but with both very archaic but also very derived anatomical characteristic, osteoanatomical characteristics. It truly is a fascinating creature that tells us and shows us that evolution is not a linear process, and that species that give rise to other subspecies in themselves may still persist for thousands of years, showing clearly that evolution is a branching process rather than a linear process. Yes, Ducre, I hope I pronounced it correctly. It is absolutely stunning. From the L vertebrae, the lumbar vertebrae up, everything about Naledi is extremely Australopith-like, except the teeth. The teeth is very Homo-like, because in your Australopithecines, the teeth are very bulbous, especially in the robusts. Uh, but in Naledi, the teeth are very, very derived. But the remainder of the skull, the cranium, is extremely Australopith-like. That's why the first time we saw fragments of the cranium, we were convinced that we are dealing here with a form of Australopith or maybe Homo habilis. But it turned out to be a a hominid falling within the clade or within the group or genus Homo? I don't know. Unfortunately, what's happened, Moss, the bones or the fossils have been lying in water for a very, 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 very long time. So maybe all viable DNA or testable DNA has been leached out. I don't know. But what I will do is I can find out for you guys, and I can post it on the Naledi site for you. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. The toe bone, the only the toe bones were archaic, but in general, uh, the foot bones in general is surprisingly modern or derived, except the toes. But the hands are absolutely Australopithecus. The phalange are incredibly curved, indicating arboreal locomotion. Very, very interesting creatures. So they would have been a bit they would have had a bit of a funny body build. So they would have had these long legs of a distance or a endurance biped, but the relatively stocky and short upper torso of a Australopithecine. So they would have looked pretty out of place. Uh, in so much so that if they still live to this day, they would have been markedly dissimilar from our proportions. Yeah, yeah, she's paused, but I hope she comes back because she's clearly a highly educated lady. I really like this, and I like sharing this with you guys. But then again, the other discovery we have made, not far from Rising Star, and this will be published